You know, it's one of those things. I have a wonderful image of Einstein. There's a number of stories, whether they're apocryphal or not, I have no idea, but there's a number of stories about him actually having the Satori, his experience of cognition, on a tram in Switzerland, I think in Zurich. And it was always that story stuck in my head somehow, that, you know, here is this very odd guy who, like me, doesn't ever wear socks. I really like people who don't wear socks. Anyway, standing on a streetcar, in a crowded streetcar, you know, riding along, and all of a sudden, you know, in this wonderful open agena of his, where, you know, you see the 11-4, you see, you know, this very special line of the teacher where only a few are truly going to understand you, which of course is very true about the nature of Einstein. Its polarity on the design side, the prophet, and of course we know that the whole atomic age, this is rooted in that moment on that streetcar on that day in Switzerland. And what's so wonderful about that is about the illusions that we give. I'm not somebody that takes praise easily. I don't like it, never did. And one of the things that's so beautiful for me within the context of the knowledge is that you get to a point where you realize in choicelessness that after all you don't do anything. I mean, I don't. You know, life happens, and it happens to my vehicle, and I simply experience what the hell's going on. And here you have Albert with his open agenda. The guy's got an open agenda. There's no way that E equals MC squared is going to go anywhere in that open agenda. That agenda needs to be triggered. If it isn't triggered, he isn't going to have the concept. And I always had this image of, I don't know if you know Zurich. Zurich's a funny town. It's a very, very wealthy town. And if you go on the public transportation, basically what you meet in public transportation is help. You know, the people that do the underclass services, and they tend to be people that come from the East, from the old Yugoslavia, you know, the immigrants that take the low-end jobs and the service jobs and whatever. So here's this wonderful image of Einstein, you know, dirt poor, thinking away. There he is on the streetcar, and sitting beside him is some old lady, you know, a bag lady, God knows what. You know, and she's sitting there with the 56 gauge, or she's sitting there with the 61 and the 56. Or it's not her, it's some 8-year-old kid or a baby in some mother's arm. And, you know, everybody buys posters of this dude now. That's really cute. I mean, after all, it didn't come from him. I mean, it didn't. I mean, you can see that in the design. It really didn't. But the moment that the connections were there, you know, that was the moment that he got to live out his purpose. You know, that was the moment that he was able to be influential. That was the moment that it all happened. It had to bang into him. You know, he's a lower trigram profile. Had to bang into him. Had to come out of nowhere. You know, he wasn't ready for it. Didn't know it was really there. Bang! After all, he spent the rest of his career basically not being able to do very much, other than be a good representative of what came out in the first place. You know, there was this perfect spark, and it was just who was there on the streetcar with him. I love Albert's design. It's really cute.
Yeah, I love it too. It's the Human Design Online mascot at this point. I've had it up. I'd like to put it up there. But what I see in this chart, don't you agree, Ron? I see a sex therapist. That's what I see. I don't see a scientist.
Yeah, interesting. He had a lot of problems with his sexuality. He had a lot of problems with women. He was not very nice to women. You know, he was somebody that psychologically brutalized his first wife. He had serious problems when it came to that end of it. But I think what you're really seeing is that, you know, sexuality was something that was an underlying theme for him, and I think he had a lot of trouble integrating that with his kind of design. I mean, you know, like everyone who lives out the not self, you know, Albert was lost from the throat up. I mean, he really was. You know, this was somebody who was just, you know, just caught in all that stuff that was flowing through.
My girlfriend, my ex-girlfriend, Shauna, her dad is a famous photographer, and he did a portrait of Albert Einstein, and this has. He said to Albert, he was like, listen, you don't have socks. Would you like some socks for the portrait? And he was like, oh, no, ever since my wife died, I don't have anybody to fix them, so I just stopped wearing them.
Yeah, that's cute. I mean, there's a lot of stories about Albert. I think the most interesting thing about him is the burnout that's there in him, the Jupiter burnout. And again, having a great deal to do with, with the way in which sexuality worked for him. I mean, obviously, difficulty with somebody like this is that you can see that, he has very little on the caring side. This is somebody who has, a certain uncomfortable need to investigate sexuality. I mean, there's a certain voyeurism, if you will, that is in there. He's much more somebody who would investigate sexuality in a way. But you can see that, he just didn't care. He has a totally open splenic system. He doesn't have, any of those streams that are really operating, so that, this was not somebody who knew how to care for another human being. And of course, the fact that he had the 59.6, that he could pull people into an intimacy, there was a seduction there in his design 59.5. The fact that he could pull them in, and the fact that they thought they were getting something, the mask of his 59.2. I mean, people with 59.2 are really, they are very, very tricky beings, let's put it that way. Because it isn't about shyness. It is a ploy. It's a way of forcing you to have them, to want them. And, I think that was something that was there in him, where he could pull that. But in the end, I think he had a lot of problems with it. I think he really suffered from all of that. When it comes to channels that are specifically associated with sexuality, whenever the lines are lower trigram, like this 36.1 as an example, or his 6.1, you're really looking at somebody who has a great deal of trouble actually doing it. There's an enormous amount of, I wonder what it's like, but there isn't a great deal of, that's what it's like. It's just not there.
Yeah, my connection is going in and out, so I'm missing a lot. But, I mean, you look at Albert with his, I think it's 11 first lines, and who he thinks he is and what his design is doing with the 11.4 and the 12.4. I mean, this is, his design is doing it. What he's doing, he's a sex maniac.
I think there's real limitations. I mean, aside from Albert's reputation, there were many other thinkers at the time that were truly brilliant and really laid the foundation for his thought and beyond. The thing about him, and again, I repeat this is, this serendipity of being in a certain place at a certain time with the right connections for a transformation, and so that he could live out the personal destiny of having all of those first lines. I mean, after all, I'm somebody with 10 first lines. I understand the pressures that are there to find that solid foundation, but also to see how fearful as a being he was. And remember something about people with a fourth line at the unconscious level of 1/4s. They're not 1/3s. They're not 1/3s. They're not looking for what is wrong. They're not. They're only interested in being able to influence others with their foundation. And I mean, one of the things about Albert's intellectual career is that from the moment that, his general theory was published, he spent the rest of his life basically supporting that theory. I mean, nothing wrong with that. I mean, after all, it was a groundbreaking way of being able to look at the whole. And yet he had an enormous problem with that. And, the problem was obvious. He didn't know where to go with it. He could only go back to a certain point. And because he was dealing with relativity, which is rooted in the concept of the movement of light, that the moment you go back to, what the physicists were beginning to call singularity in the 30s, that is this moment of the get-go of the totality, when you get to that moment, there's no light, and everything about relativity breaks down. And this is where you get Albert talking about God doesn't throw dice and blah, blah, blah. He couldn't get beyond that.